Well, if you didn't know it by now, you are about to find out that April is National Poetry Month, and we're celebrating the art in all of its forms this month by celebrating those who make it. In truth, I think we are all poets. We're born poets. We may not all be great poets, but actual research by neuroscientists has proven that we're actually hardwired to recognize and appreciate rhymes and rhythms. Our brains are activated by poetic imagery, and reading, writing, and listening to poetry of all forms is good for our brains, and it's great for our overall well-being. And our guest today is a poet who lives in the Villages, Florida, which is not just the largest active adult community in the world, it's the fastest growing metro area in the United States. I don't even know what the population is. I think it's over 150,000 now. I do know that it's projected to grow to nearly 500,000 by the year 2060. So what does today's guest do? I think the question is, what doesn't he do? He is the president of the Writers League of the Villages. He's a board member of Boulder in the Villages, one of the hot new clubs in town. He is the host of the Wine and Words monthly literary talk show. He's the author and producer of the It Happened in the Villages murder mystery play series, and he's the author of a great new book of poetry that's called Sunset Years, Poems for Seniors Who Still Love Life and Each Other. Lots to talk about as we welcome Frank Lancione. Frank, how you doing today?
Wonderful, Mark.
You know, I appreciate your time. As busy as you are, is life in the Villages as great as it sounds?
You know what? I always say that the Villages is the example of what it means to live growing bolder. There's no, people are not looking back. They're looking forward in their life.
You know, I love that. I want to get to your book in a moment because I did thoroughly enjoy it. But I think, you know, as kids, we all enjoy Roses Are Red and, you know, There Was a Man from Nantucket. We all had that part of our life. When did you begin to take poetry seriously? Is this a later in life pursuit for you, or have you always been a poet?
No, no, I was a senior vice president of operations, working killer hours, never had any time for that. When I retired, which I did at 66, as I started to get closer and closer to 70, I had an interesting discussion with my doctor. He basically said, "You're going to have a lousy retirement and it's your fault. You need to drastically change your style of living if you want to have a good retirement." So I walked out of it. I'm a goal-directed person. I said, "Okay, I've got 2 years. By the time I hit 70, I'm going to lose 60 pounds. I'm going to be doing," well, I did all those things. And as I started to go towards that, I wanted to record that journey. And I found that doing so in rhyme and verse focused my thoughts, really made you distill the essence of what you were experiencing. And so about 4 years later, I had friends saying, "You've got all these poems," because at Wine and Words, which is a literary talk show, I interview authors. They have a chance to read from their works. I usually share some of my stuff, and my colleagues were coming in saying, "You need to write a book of your stuff." So this past year, I put together the collection, when it ended up being 107 poems, kind of thematically grouped, and that's how it was. And I still find a lot of comfort. There's a very robust poetry community here in the Villages. Our paper, the Daily Sun, runs a page or two of poems every week. And so we have a lot of contributors. So there's a lot going on. Like many of the folks in our Writers League, people are discovering in their later years they now have time to try things that they never thought they would do.
Talk, if you will, Frank, a little bit about, because you've mentioned this a couple of times already, the importance of support and encouragement. I think there's two different camps of people as we get older. A lot of people just become more timid. They're afraid to take risks. They're afraid to fail. They're afraid of embarrassment. And many people on their own can't take the step out to try something new. And they need that encouragement, that support. What have you seen in your own life about the importance of encouraging and supporting others to chase their dreams, even if they seem silly?
So there's two interesting answers to that. The first, I'm going to talk about our Writers League Club. At this stage in our life, when you finally get work behind you, people are saying, my gosh, who's going to know my story? Who's going to tell my story? Maybe I should tell my story. And so they may have thought about writing the memoir of some sort at some point in their time, but they've never really known how to start. And they end up finding their way to the Writers League. We're going to have over 300 members by the end of the year. Some of them are internationally recognized authors who get up every day to see how many books they sold in Japan and India. But many of them are just coming in for the first time. They've got an inkling that they'd like to write their life story and they don't know how to even start. And it is extremely helpful to be in a community of people who are going to lift you up. And that's what we have over 3,000 clubs in the villages, all of them started by and operated by residents. So in our case, we have three main goals to our club. We help you become a better writer. We have master classes on that and different types of critique groups. We help you market your group. This past year, we did a book expo with over 100 of our authors. And we had 3,300 people come through in a 6-hour period, and people were selling out of their books. They were delighted. The last thing we do is we provide an opportunity for you to socialize with other writers. So people get very comfortable. They feel like, you know what? I'm not the only one who's new at this. These people are giving me a lot of good feedback. They're giving you a lot of good work. So an example is our club, but ours is just one example. All of the clubs out here, there are people who never thought they'd ever be athletic again in their life, and they end up going to the senior games and competing in Olympic-style meets against people their own age. And Mark, you're a senior games champion. You know what that's like. So this ability to find a place where there are people who will help you, give you that initial hand up, that's the Villages in spades, and it means everything, and people are successful. But I want to talk about number two. A lot of people have said that there's a strain in the DNA of Americans, people who grew up here, because you had to come from Europe and make that trip across. And it doesn't mean just the pilgrims. I mean, my grandfather left Italy with 4 brothers. They came to the United States. They never went home. That immigrant story is very, very familiar. And today people are making the trek from stations and they'll never go back to where they were. The Villages is like that. You don't come to the Villages because that's where your kid has moved. Quite the reverse. Your kids probably live somewhere else. You may have had to move from your hometown. You come to the Villages because you come here and you say, there's something here about the quality of life that I can't find someplace else. There's something here that makes me want to come here. This is going to let me be the person I always hoped I could be. I want to be a part of this, even though I'm having to move away from everything that's familiar. If you're that kind of person, you're not a timid person, because it took a lot for you to leave what you knew that was familiar behind and come down here and all of a sudden recreate your life in a new place, make new friends, try new things. But you're kind of, if you come here, you're a little bit of that person to start with, I think.
You know, you mentioned 3,000 clubs in the Villages. I want to put a pin in that, and I want to talk about one of those clubs because, full disclosure, folks, I know Frank. I bumped into Frank at one of the clubs in the Villages, a club that's called Boulder in the Villages, and I want to learn more about that. But let's get to the book if we can, because this is it, folks. You can get it on Amazon, and you really should. I was stunned when I saw there was only $9.99. Now, Amazon prices go up and down, so don't quote me on that. But this is a great book, and it is filled with fun, inspiring, thoughtful poems. But Frank, check me if I'm wrong. I think it's really a book about love, and you don't have to be a genius to figure that out, because your chapter titles make it pretty clear. I mean, the chapter titles are things like Poems for Seniors Who Still Love One Another, Poems for Seniors Who Still Love Life, Poems for Seniors Who Love Cruising the Caribbean, Poems for Seniors Who Are Not Ready for the Rocking Chair. And as you noted before we started this conversation, you and I are kindred spirits in the way that we look at life, because at Growing Bolder, folks, you know this by now, we look at growing older as a blessing, something to be grateful for. We look at it through a prism of passion and purpose, and not simply loss and limitation. And Frank, that is you to a T, and that's this book to a T. So tell me what you were trying to accomplish with this book, and am I right to say that It's a love story.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I, t- I tell people, you need to get this for your wife for Valentine's Day. So, Mark, you know what life is like at this age. As we approached our 50th anniversary, which was last year, I started writing poems about that. Actually, my wife and I in 2021 went on a 3-month, 10,000-mile RV trip around the country. Prior to that, our longest RV trip had been a 3-mile test drive. And then we had 6 months to get ready for this 10,000-mile trip. We came back from that and I said, if there's something wrong with your RV, it's the stresses of this kind of a trip are going to break it. And you're going to see it. Well, guess what? Spending night and day together for 3 months under circumstances that are completely unfamiliar and you're stretching every time you go out. If there's something wrong with your relationship, it's going to break. And ours didn't. Actually, we kind of got closer from the trip. And so when I came back, I wrote one poem about that. And then the floodgates opened. And then it was coming up on our anniversary. And all of a sudden I started contemplating, what does it mean to be married to somebody for 50 years? And I think the line that comes to me that really encapsulates all of it is, after a lifetime with you as lover, partner, best friend, it's hard for me to even say where I start and you end. So think about those couples that have been lucky enough to have whatever period of time, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Those years are decades of your own life. And the experiences of your life, the who you are, get shaped not just by you, but by your joint experiences. One of my other poems is No Chance, No Way. Would I be the man I am today without you in my life? No chance, no way. And it goes on to talk about, what do I know about being a parent? It's from raising our daughter. What do I know about responsibility? It was from taking care of our family. And so if you think about your life that way, yeah, it's a love story. But can I read one quick poem to you?
Well, you beat me to it. I was going to ask you to do it. Yes, please.
All right. So there's one of my lines in my poem say, the young can't imagine is full of passion. Well, this is one of my favorite. This is what it's like to be 70 poems. It's called 16. The summer sun's hot. We're cruising along. Car radio's blasting. A country rock song. Volumes cranked up. I am too. I love driving fast and being with you. We're both 70 plus, but I feel 16. To me, you're still as beautiful as any prom queen. I didn't know back then I'd ever have this life. Working years behind me, you as my wife. I didn't know then I'd still love the rush of fast cars and loud music, making you blush. The young think old means they're through. They don't know me. They don't know you. Careening down life's road with you by my side is still a thrill, one hell of a ride. To me, you're still the prettiest girl I've ever seen. Our bodies may be 70, but our hearts are still 16.
Man, your wife is a lucky, lucky woman. What does she think when you write that kind of stuff about her and your relationship?
So I read poems like this at my wine and words and sometimes out. And here's the great irony of life. Women come up, oh, your life must be so happy. Opposites attract. My wife is an introvert. It's embarrassing to her to be in a room with the entire audience turning around and looking at her. She's getting better about it, but she loves the poems and she loves that we're still in love. But if you're an introvert and 50 or 60 people are looking at you, it's not the easiest thing for you. But we're incredibly lucky to be together and have had a great life together.
As an author, when you write a book, I mean, do you think about who you want to read it? And I say this because this is one of the problems with our culture is that when you create content that presumably is for an older audience, young people shy away from it. But what you just read, the message that you just delivered, is so powerful and so profound and so needed by younger people to understand that here you are in your 70s and you're still cruising down the highway with some hot chick at your side, enjoying life as much as you did when you were 16. That's a message that people need to understand when they're younger. So are you finding younger people are finding their way to your book, and do you hope that they do?
Well, I don't get demographics on who buys. The book has been very successful in its first couple of weeks. It was the hot new read in American poetry, contemporary poetry, and poetry anthologies
Wow.
on Amazon. So the book did very well out of the gate. What's kind of interesting is in the elevator speech for the book. What I say in the last line is, it's a prescription that living applies regardless of your age or life stage. A lot of this book is advice that I wanted to pass down to my grandkids, because like most people, my grandkids are 8 and 11. So by the time they really take an interest in, well, who are Nana and Papa and what were their life about, I mean, and really understand that, we'll be gone. So, for example, and you'll relate to this being an athlete, a couple of years ago, I had an injury and I was powerlifting at the time, pretty heavy powerlifting, intermediate level. And so I was out of powerlifting for about 8 weeks. Well, it took me 14 weeks to get back to where I was. And I said, you know what? I'm going to write a poem every week about this because I want my grandkids to know that life gives you these setbacks and it is god awful hard to get through. You got to keep focused, but that you can make it through. And I want that message to be there for them. So there are little Easter eggs like that throughout here that it's a message to anybody. And frankly, anytime I'm facing big setbacks, I go back and look at that series of poems and try to remind myself that stay focused, harden your body, harden your will. You can make it. You can do it. You've done it before. You can do it. So yeah, the message I think applies to different ages, not just us, but to the younger folks. Again, this idea that, oh my God, if they ever came to the villages, you go to one of our centers, there's a rock band playing, there's people dancing, old people are walking around, holding hands and stuff. It's unbelievable. It's not the image that you see in our culture. As you've said so eloquently, Mark, our culture, it has an image of us that when you're old, I say, the old are in our culture incontinent and incompetent. That's the image they have of us. They can't imagine passion. They can't imagine getting up every day full of excitement and really still pursuing new goals, even new strength goals at this age. That's inconceivable to them, but that's the life we really have.
And the beauty of poetry, I think, is that, it not only delights our ear, but, it stimulates our mind and our imagination. It makes us think about things that we wouldn't otherwise. One of the things I like about the book, not for every poem, but there are many poems where you write a narrative before the poem to, explain what it's about, the circumstance that inspired you to write it. And again, full disclosure, folks, that I was blown away by this. There's a page in there about growing bolder, and not just the concept of growing bolder, but specifically about our company here at Growing Bolder. And then there's just tons of poems that reflect our shared interest in inspired, active, passionate aging. And you mentioned this club, Boulder in the Villages, where we have met and gotten to be friends. Tell us a little bit about the Boulder in the Villages Club, and if there's a poem that reflects what that club's about or your interest in what we do here at Growing Boulder, would you read that to us as well?
There's at least 5 poems. And by the way, you're being very modest. That introduction is not just about Growing Boulder. That introduction is about Mark Middleton. Because when I read, in fact, at one of the meetings, I took Mark's book and I said, if you haven't read this, you really need to read it. Because Growing Bolder is not just Mark's story, it's a story of all of us. And Mark went through the same journey that all of us have, where at some point in your life you realize, my gosh, the culture is writing me off. If I were to accept the messages that are being given to me, I'm going to be in decline, and that's not it. And so Mark went on and created the whole philosophy of growing bolder. And I say, is growing older a bad thing? Depends where you are. In an Asian culture, they equate life experience with wisdom. And so in an Asian culture, as you grow older, you become more valued and more valuable in the society. In America, particularly in our commercial activities, our advertisers have focused on the young. That creates a situation in which you grow less valuable, if you were to believe what the ageist advertising images are, as you get older. And it's the reverse. It's the reverse. And yeah, I wrote 5 poems for the club. The club is phenomenal. The Growing Bolder organization does a lot to help us out. But really, our mission here in the villages, as the villages representatives of the Growing Bolder movement, is to get the word out about the philosophy and to really help. And then Growing Bolder Parent Organization does something that's incredibly generous. They assist by allowing the local club to nominate worthy 501c3 organizations, worthy charitable organizations that are doing things that embody the benefits of the Growing Bolder movement. So I'll give an example that we recently featured a club. It's called My Time, and it's a place where folks who have spouses with Alzheimer's can take their spouses and they do things together. Now, is this about Alzheimer's? Well, it was an Alzheimer's related club, but the real story was about how these couples are acting in their senior years, in their older years. That was the story. We did a story on one of the local animal shelters. Was it an animal story? Well, there were animals in the story, but the story was about villagers who have come and in their senior years made this a mission, and how they had adopted something that was much bigger. So the stories embody the principles of Growing Bolder. They are the case studies of people who are exemplifying in their lives growing bolder, but the clubs get helped as well. And that's incredibly generous because Mark and his organization are doing these showcase videos, which the clubs are then able to use in their own marketing and on their websites to get the word out about their mission. So it's a win-win. And the Growing Bolder meetings, we're growing bigger. We're now looking for bigger rooms because we're outgrowing our facilities in the rec halls. But it's a wonderful program, and it's this whole idea. People in the villages want the village's lifestyle. The village's lifestyle is emblematic of what it means to live now and ahead, not in the past. Not that you discount the past, but that you're not stuck in the past. You see every day as an adventure, an opportunity. That's the Growing Bolder philosophy. So the Bolder in the Villages Club, through our website, through our meetings, through our activities, we try to foster that and get the word out and be a place where people with that philosophy can come. Did I do a reasonable job, Mark?
You know what? If you weren't doing it as well as you were, I would have stopped you long ago because, this is about you and not about us. But thank you for that. It was eloquent and gracious and greatly, greatly appreciated. So read one of or parts of whatever you want. Would you read something that was kind of inspired by or generated by your participation in the club?
I will. I've got 2 poems. I'll read one, and then I'll read one that I think embodies the philosophy of the club. This I wrote specifically for the club. Destiny. The old say their best days were a time in their past. They're weaker, slower, life's slipping away fast. Maybe you feel that way too, that decline is inevitable. There's nothing you can do. What would you do if this wasn't true? What if the problem's not age, but you? The old say that even if that's right, they're too worn out to put up a fight. Their time's too short. They're too close to their end. They just don't have the energy they did way back then. They claim their striving is history. What they are now is all they'll ever be. The bold take a stand, draw a red line, focus on their future instead of what's behind. Their past is not the bold's destiny. Their final years, are whatever they want them to be.
Amen. I love that. That's, as you know, why we have a program called Launchpad to What's Next, that everybody is or should be looking for what's next, and your poems, inspire people to do that all the time. I love this. And you said you had another one that you were going to read.
This is actually the poem that is the namesake poem of the book. And I think it is another very good description of what it means to live bold, not old. So this is sunset years. Your sunset years are no time to sit in a chair, out of shape, face fixed in a sad, vacant stare. There's still plenty of time to fight the good fight before you go quietly into the night. Still time for romance to stir passion in you. Still time to experience love, deep and true. There's still time to draw on your inner strength fountains. Still time to climb those last few elusive goal mountains. Still time to gain more knowledge, even physical strength too. Your last chance to be that final best you. So, will you go out weak and sorry? Or will your sunset years be a blaze of glory? For you still decide where your future lies, be technicolor clouds exploding against crimson sunset skies.
Love it. And that describes the cover of your book perfectly. In the book, Frank, you hint, you tease, you telegraph that this is probably not going to be a one-off, that you, almost like a Chicken Soup for the Soul series, there is a Sunset Year series coming. Is it true? Is there another one in the works?
There is, actually. I think I mentioned that my wife and I had been on that RV trip in 2021, and I wrote a series of 20 blogs during that trip. And a magazine called Villages Neighbors and Villages Neighbors South. Together, the two magazines have a publication of about 52,000 households here in the villages. They've picked up that series. And so there's going to be a series of 7 articles. The first one came out in January. And my wife and I, Diane and I were the cover. And then they're featuring an article each month or every other month. So there'll be 7 altogether over the year. And they're very interesting. And the theme of those, the reason I think it might be a good book, is that, well, when I first started, I was focused on this question. Diane and I grew up in a small town, very patriotic, blue collar, very modest. And we turn on TV and there's these people who say, "I hate America." And we thought, that can't be possible. Is that possible? Is that really what people feel like? We're going to be going all over the country. Let's ask them. So as we would go to places, we'd be in Walmarts and truck stops and campgrounds, and we would just ask people, not the first thing, but after you've talked for a while, you get to know somebody and say, this stuff you hear on TV, just like people who say they don't like the country. Is that the way you feel? Oh, no, absolutely not. And so we started to think, well, okay, a lot of this stuff that just isn't what the average American feels like, the person that we would relate to, a middle-class person. Then we got out to the West, and then we found that there was something even bigger than that. I've flown all over the country. I mean, in every state, maybe Alaska's, I think, the only one I wasn't in, but I've been in Hawaii. On business, you fly into cities, you fly out, the drill, Mark. But I'd never done 10,000 miles at ground level driving through the West, through the mountains, to the valleys, through the plains, through the deserts, seeing, all of these things. And what struck Diane and I more than anything was when people say, "Oh, I hate America," they don't hate America. They've never even seen America. What they're talking about is they hate their political rivals. That's not actually America. When you're out there and you see this, you realize, my gosh, the actual America is the physical land itself. And we and everything we think is so important, we're just another species here that's cohabiting in this space. And geologic time is way bigger than us. So if you go to the Petrified Forest, which I love, there's one of the stops, which is an exhibit. It's a big exhibit about a community that was there 700 years ago. 99 people lived there, and it's 700 years old, and you can still see the foundation stones. Okay, you know what the next stop is? You're walking through an actual landscape where there are petrified logs. They're 19 million years old. 700 years, 19 million years. So all these things that we think are so important, they're like the buzzing of hornets in a nest, trying to sort out their social order. The mountains don't really care too much about who wins our culture wars. And they're going to be here before us and after us. And when you're in the West, you go to Salt Lake City. I drove an RV through downtown New York City with a tow car at rush hour. My joke is everything you see is made by mankind. Go out to Salt Lake City. Yes, you see all the buildings made by mankind, but you look up and in the backdrop are the mountains. And you suddenly realize that in the West, this backdrop of the mountains, of these beautiful vistas, it puts us and our problems and our disputes and everything we think is so important this big. America is this big and this deep and this timeless. And our problems and our disputes and people spewing off and saying bad things about our country on TV, they've never actually seen the country and probably never will. They're more likely to go watch somebody's cathedral in Europe than to drive and experience the Rocky Mountains or the deserts of Arizona or the plains of the Midwest or the rocky coast of Maine, things that are not in the city, they're outside.
Spoken like a true poet. And thank you for that, Frank, because you've given me a whole new way to think about and saying, I love America. I love the physical part of America, not necessarily what we all talk about and argue about, the image of America, the promise of America, just America. That's easy to love. Thank you for that. And also thank you for the notion of the RV relationship test. I think that's a good one. Jump in an RV, coast to coast with your spouse, and if you come out of it stronger than ever, it's a good relationship. Give us a takeaway, if you will, because you're obviously a big thinker, but more than that, there's a lot of big thinkers that don't have an empathetic heart, that don't have a kind soul. You've got all of it. What's the takeaway about life in general? What have you learned that we should know?
Never stop striving, never stop dreaming, never stop achieving. That's the secret to life. That's the message of the book.
I love it. And you mentioned the book. You read 3 poems, I think, maybe 4. Do you mind? Can I try to read one of your poems, Frank?
Please do.
This one is called...
That's an honor for me, Mark.
No, well, give me a shot at it because it may not be. This one is called Victorious. Take a good look in the mirror. Is what you see there boldness or fear? What if you lived like great things were still ahead for you? What if you focused on all that you still can do? What if you radiated confidence, a sense of living victorious? What if instead of despair and disillusion, your default mode was feeling glorious? Decide if you or your age will define who you'll be, if you or the calendar will dictate your destiny. Life's greatest secret is more precious than gold. Choose to live bold, and you'll never be old. I love it. Frank Lancione.
You are the poet laureate of that, Mark. You have helped so many people by giving them the simple insight that they can be and grow bold instead of old.
You know what? Again, thank you for that. But here's the truth, since you brought it up. We're just the conduit to share people like you. You know, we can sit here and say things all day long, and we all hear people blah, 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 blah. But, you know, what we have learned, and we've talked about this, the thing that transforms lives, you know, the switch is flipped. People realize they can do more when they see someone like you doing something that they didn't think they could do or want to do. When they see a guy in his 70s who is loving life, who is living life, who is writing poems, who is publishing books, who is joining clubs, who is helping others, they think, you know what, there's still reason to keep on keeping on. So thank you. But you know, our secret is just to get people like you in front of the camera and on the microphone and do their thing. So thank you for that. And Frank, let me leave it with this, folks. It is a fun read. It's an inspiring read. It's a great read. Pick it up. This is what I like. You know, I'm not a reader. I read constantly all day long, but I can't read long books because my day is just punctuated with stuff. But this is something you can pick up. Read a few poems, be inspired, smile, feel good about your life, be grateful for the blessing of extra years, put it back down, pick it back up. It's called Sunset Years, Poems for Seniors Who Still Love Life and Each Other. It is fun, it is funny, it is poignant. You can order it today on Amazon for less than $10. Go get it today. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Mark.